CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Kenya has announced an immediate ban on child adoption by foreign nationals. The decision announced by Kenya's government follows a cabinet meeting chaired by President Uhuru Kenyatta, bringing the subject of intercountry adoption back on the international stage. Kenya's ban follows an earlier one by Ethiopia last year and is part of a growing global trend towards either complete elimination or sharp restriction of cross-border child adoptions. Foreign child adoption in Africa is an emotive subject, with concerns raised over child trafficking and abuse, cultural displacement, and unregulated adoption frameworks. But with many children still in need of safe and secure environments to grow up in, are domestic options alone able to meet the needs of these children? And what will be the fate of intercountry adoptions in Africa? I am Liu Feifei. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, there was a time when foreign adoptions from Africa were rare. In 2003, for example, intercountry adoptions from Africa are reported to have accounted for only 5% of the world total. However, this figure rose to 25% by 2012, representing a staggering increase of almost 400%, making Africa the then new frontier for the adoption of children by foreign nationals. The steep rise was triggered by prevailing issues such as conflict, famine, poverty, and the AIDS epidemic. In this era, Hollywood had also come calling, with several high-profile adoptions by celebrities, shining a spotlight on adoption from Africa. However, times have since changed. Experts relate improved economic conditions, changed national policies, and growing peace to the reduction in Africa's foreign adoptions, which have since dropped by an estimated 72% in the past decade. This is in line with the global figure, which has seen a similar decline. With me today is a panel of experts specialized in the topic of child adoptions in Africa. Robin Wolfson Forster is in Johannesburg, South Africa. She is a child protection advocate with a special interest in adoption advocacy and also an adoptive mother. And in studio is Wamaitha Mwangi, founder of the Angel Center for Abandoned Children, which is a non-governmental organization that takes abandoned and orphaned babies. Joining us in studio also is Rose Mbanya, a family lawyer in Nairobi. Thank you all for being part of this discussion. Now, following this recent special cabinet meeting, Kenya has announced an immediate ban on the adoption of children here by foreign nationals. Rose, can you tell us what led to this ban?
Okay, there's been a moratorium on the adoption by foreigners since 2014. So the ban came, I believe, to cause that to be no longer temporary measure, but a full measure ban on the adoptions. It may very well be because of an expose that was done a few weeks ago about children in Kenya and the way that the living conditions. It was also reported that there was a lot that was said about Kenya being one of the hubs of child trafficking. Of course, I would be the first to say that adoption and trafficking do not fit in the same sentence, but I believe it is the whole view that the space of international adoptions may be one of the places that trafficking may be happening, that perhaps the government was concerned and therefore caused the ban.
And definitely we're going to talk about what can be done to clean up this process, if at all that's possible. Right. Now, Maitha, you run a children's center here in Nairobi.
Correct.
Can you tell us what is going to be the immediate impacts of this ban?
Well, as she mentioned, the ban was in 2014, the initial ban. The impact that it has had is, of course, adoptions have gone low. And what I can mention is foreigners used to adopt boys and children with special needs. Local adoption, there is usually a problem. The girls are adopted faster, and they are the ones who are adopted more. Boys, in most institutions, there's just more boys. So that has kind of affected the children with special needs as well as the boy child. It might not look obvious, but it's true, because the adopters, not all of them want boys because of probably African heritage and stuff.
And this, in fact, is not unique to Kenya, this trend towards curtailing the adoption of children by foreign nationals. Robin, over to you in Johannesburg. In fact, we see that in places such as South Africa and Malawi, there's also this trend towards governments wanting to curb allowing foreigners to adopt children. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yes, you're completely correct. This is an international trend. And in fact, internationally, we're seeing a tailoring off and a dropping in the number of inter-country adoptions. And on the one hand, we can understand why this is happening. We certainly don't want there to be allegations of trafficking, but we need to look at the best interests of children. And unfortunately, for many children, as the example of the abandoned children in Kenya, those children who have no options for family reunification and potentially no options for domestic adoption, if they don't have the option of inter-country adoption, then their only potential childhood experience will be in an institution. And from all the studies that we have seen, we can say that certainly permanent family care is far better than institutional care. So there's a concern that actually we need to be fixing adoption and looking at the reasons why there may be problems in some countries in inter-country adoptions, rather than stopping it completely.
Rose, can you tell us what is wrong with the system? Why is this inter-country adoption so susceptible to abuse?
May I say this, that I don't actually think that it's the adoption process, the international adoption process, that necessarily has the problem. The reason I say this is, by the time these parents would be coming, say, to Kenya for an adoption, they've gone through about 3 or 4 years of counseling and being checked and rechecked in their home country. And when they come to Kenya, they then go to the agency here and then the National Adoption Committee, so that the strictures for the parent who will submit themselves to the court process for international adoption is certainly not the profile of a trafficker. I think that the debate should be a bigger one. Where are the loopholes? You know, where are these places that people, traffic children? Because adoption was going on, and I think that Kenya is one of the countries in which the strictures were so tight that a parent coming to adopt would have to stay for about 9 months to a year. Almost a year in Kenya just to adopt. That doesn't fit the profile of somebody who wants to come and steal a baby, does it? However, if trafficking, if it's being confirmed or reported that trafficking is still happening in Kenya, then the place where it's happening still needs to be looked at and is not being looked at. Maybe the porous borders, maybe, routes that are being used, because I really don't think that the foreign adopters, with the kind of scrutiny that they had to go through, would be the ones that would be, trafficking the children. Trafficking may be happening, but it was not happening through the adoption
By
process.
the prospective adoptive parents. What about the people who are coming here for adoptions, coming to Africa? Maybe, Robin, I'll pose this question to you. What is the profile of someone who wants to travel all the way to Africa to adopt a baby who might not have the same background as they do?
So I think it's very important to look at 2 distinctions within Africa, and those are the distinction between Hague Convention countries and non-Hague Convention countries. So there are only 3 countries in Africa that are Hague Convention signatories, which means that the adoption process within those 3 countries is very, very tightly controlled. But then there are a number of other countries, and a lot of the abuses that we have seen are coming through those non-Hague Convention signatory countries. But what's interesting is that, so in terms of the profile of those people, there are people who potentially are desperate for children because they're childless, but often they're people who are looking at giving a home to a child particularly who is a child who has special needs, or an older child, or a child who wouldn't be able to be placed in a permanent family care in any other circumstances. So certainly not your malicious person who might be having bad intent. And in fact, what we see is often it's not the adoptive parents who are the problem in intercountry adoptions that go wrong. It tends to be more intermediaries or other people who are involved, who are sourcing children who are actually not adoptable and who shouldn't ever have been placed in an adoption situation.
Now, this is interesting that you should mention that, because one of the stories that's really been captured by the headlines and which has been used by the government in Ethiopia to justify why they've banned intercountry adoption is the story of Hannah Williams. I'm sure you guys are aware of this. Now, for our viewers who don't know, she was an Ethiopian girl who was adopted, and she died in the year 2011 from neglect by her adoptive parents. It's absolutely heartbreaking because apparently she froze to death. She died of hypothermia in America as a form of punishment. Now, when Ethiopia banned adoption in 2018, they cited this as an example that the children taken away from their home countries get abused in foreign countries. So how would you respond to that?
This is how I'd respond to that. Before 2014, we had what we call the National Adoption Committee in Kenya, which one of the mandates was actually to send people from time to time to the various countries where foreign adopters would come from. A lot of the adopters, the international adopters would come from the Schengen countries, Denmark, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, and so on. And so there would actually be, I know that I was part of a group that actually went just to see how are the children doing, and would go in intervals of 3 years. So the children that were adopted at 3 years, how are they doing at 6 years? How are they doing at 9 years? How are they doing at 12 years? From time to time, whether local adoptions or international adoptions, or in fact, natural families, there will be bad parenting, isn't it? I don't know that that should be used of itself to ban entirely without especially looking at what are the options. So for me, what I'd want to say is, what's the socio-economic reason that causes that? You see, if a parent, maybe a single young girl who's had a baby and is not unable to take care of her, if the socio-economic space was looked at, then she would not even be vulnerable to a middleman who would tell her, look, there's an easier life for you, or there's a better way of doing this, or, take this money and I'll take your baby. So I think that what needs to be, when we talk about loopholes, the socio-economic space, that needs to be looked at.
Well, on that note, let's talk also about these children who are being put up for adoption. Who are they? I mean, we assume that they're orphans, but by definition, an orphan is someone who still has one parent. One parent, right? There are children who have been lost, who have been abandoned, and now there are children who have been stolen and kidnapped. So who are these children who are being put up for adoption?
Okay, I'll speak for Angel Center because we take strictly abandoned children. If a child has a parent, we usually keep them temporarily until the children officer finds the family. They'll either find an auntie or a grandma or something, but usually the ones that we have and that are up for adoption are strictly abandoned children. Those are the ones I deal with.
And Robin, what about in South Africa? What is the situation with children who are available for adoption in South Africa? Are there a large number of these children?
Yes, there are. And in fact, it's a problem because we have very low adoption rates in South Africa. And so we're looking at a lot of children who are sitting in baby homes for very long periods of time and who are growing older and older. And certainly in South Africa, we've seen a trend where older children don't tend to be adopted nationally. So those children, if they don't have intercountry adoption as an option for them, many of them won't actually be able to have permanent family care. We also are seeing a lot of children who are consented for adoption because their mothers are struggling to be able to take care of themselves. Sometimes it's very sad. We see mothers who have got more than sort of 2 or 3 children, and they get to the point where they literally cannot take care of that third or fourth child. And so they either place them for adoption, or unfortunately we have huge abandonment rates in South Africa. About 3,500 children survive abandonment every year in this country. So between that and the number of children who have no family care and who have lost either one or both parents, we know that there is a huge need for adoption, certainly in this country.
Indeed, the figures kind of boggles the mind, right? Because globally there's, correct me if I'm wrong, about 140 million children up for adoption, orphans, and 52 million of those children are here in Africa. And so these foreigners, mostly they're Westerners from more affluent countries, North America, Europe, and Australia, they come looking to help these children, but when they come, why is it that they're not getting matched up? Why is it that children snatching and coercing parents to get their children is still necessary?
I think it's greed. It's pure greed, especially from the middlemen. And then they prey on vulnerable women. They prey on vulnerable families. So they promise them, you know, a certain amount. And since that family is destitute, they will take anything. So and then also there is the case of knowledge. Not many of them have a lot of education. So they really don't understand what's going on. So I think that's usually a problem.
And on that note, it's time for our first break. When we come back, we will continue this discussion with our experts, and we'll talk more about the ethical issues and possible solutions to the need for adoptions here in Africa. Stay tuned.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Robin Forster is in Johannesburg. Wamaitha Mwangi and Rose Mbanya are still with me in the studio to continue exploring the contentions around inter-country adoptions in the wake of Kenya's recent ban. Now, ladies, we've been talking about the process issues, but there's other considerations. There's the ethical issues surrounding inter-country adoptions. Namely, you have these foreigners who've come into Africa, they've taken these young babies away from their communities, away from things that they're familiar with, and moved them to a whole new continent. And when they're babies, it might be okay, but as they grow, because this is a lifetime process, when they grow and they become adults, one day they wake up and they're like, hey, I don't look like everyone else. You know, my family might not really be my family. So there's an identity crisis. How do we address this ethical dilemma of cultural displacement?
Okay. It's a difficult one, yeah, because it's pitted 2 things. Imagine a child whose only other hope would have been to be in an institution. Are they not better off in a family where they receive love? I'm wondering if I was born wherever, or if I was adopted at a very young age wherever, but I'm receiving the love and the support and the affirmation that I require. Perhaps those are the softer skills that would then help me not have an identity crisis. Of course, we can't close our eyes to the facts, to the real facts of the matter. I mean, me in a Caucasian family, obviously I look very, very different. Maybe one of the things that we would say is, oh, okay, of course for Kenya now they've said, you know, stop this already. We're not going to have any of this anymore. But if it were to go on, I suppose the whole thing is the softer skills to ensure that families who receive, say, chocolate-colored children like me and they're Caucasian have got the softer skills of affirmation, constant knowledge, and also the right to information to those children right from the get-go, so that it becomes possible for them, because to just be able to look back, trace back, get their roots, but know that they've been safe, they've been loved, and they've been well affirmed.
Robin, to you in South Africa. Now, what we haven't mentioned is that you have also adopted a daughter in South Africa. Is there an interracial element to that?
Yes, there is an interracial element. So my daughter is black and I'm white. So yes, we've had to negotiate and navigate some of these issues around culture. It certainly is somewhat different because we're still entrenched within the South African culture, and my daughter has a lot of role models who are black, and we are ensuring that she's able to speak a black language, and that so she's able to learn about her culture and be entrenched in it as much as possible. We understand that there are shortcomings, but I think what's very important is that we look at why we adopted our daughter and also why other people should be adopting if they are adopting transracially. And I think what has happened in adoption is it's kind of got turned on its head in many senses. So what has happened is it's been very parent oriented and very parent focused. What do the parents need? And then adoption becomes a supply and demand process, which we don't want at all. Whereas if you are looking at adoption from the perspective of the best interests of the child, which is certainly, it's a principle in the South African Constitution. I think it is the principle that guides child protection across the world. No, well, the best interests of the child have to be met by that adoption.
Robin, just in terms of your daughter, can you share with us, are there any challenges that she has faced specifically because of this interracial aspect of your family, your modern family?
Well, she's quite little still, so she's only 7. She is aware of the fact that her skin color is different to ours. But fortunately, we're in a city that is full of very mixed families, so she doesn't feel particularly different or unusual. Also, we're engaging with it all the time. I believe that as an adoptive parent, you've got to face all of the challenges head on, and you can't be in denial about the fact that there are cultural differences, that your child might feel identity challenges as they grow older. And certainly we're thinking that possibly as she becomes a teenager, she's going to have different identity challenges to deal with. But what we're trying to do is to face it intentionally and to look at getting the best advice we possibly can. For example, from adult adoptees who have been transracially adopted. They have a lot of wisdom to impart in terms of what to do right and also what to avoid as well.
And in a way, you are still lucky because you are, as you said, still here on the continent in Africa, where she has other people from the same culture that she can refer to and look up to and consult with as she goes up. But there are children who don't have that luxury, and that's the intercountry adoptions. Now, in your experience, you've also sent children from your children's
Yes.
home to other countries, as far as, I think, Denmark and Germany.
Yeah.
How can we help these children?
Well, the parents we've dealt with, especially from Germany, have been very active in showing the child that, where they're from. They come and visit the center. They come and visit Kenya every year. These are 3 of the families. Then they also discuss, with them that, we are of different races, but we do love you, we are your parents. But they never once have kind of hid from the child where they're from. They do come and visit, and the child right now is 8 years old, and he was adopted when he was 6, and they have come here every year since he was adopted. So they show the child where they're from. They take the child to the Mara, they take the child to the coast to show them that this is your country. So one of the moms told me, of course they're the children in school. Oh, why are you black? And, the other children are white. But then he now has the knowledge to explain to them that I'm this color because I'm adopted and I'm from Kenya. You see, but he understands that the parents love him.
Let's turn our attention to talking about solutions. Robin, you are someone who has gone through domestic adoption yourself. Do you think that domestic adoptions could one day kind of substitute and supplement the bans on international, intercountry adoptions?
Well, I think the principle in child protection is always that we look at concentric layers of decision making as far as what's in the best interests of a child. So what we have in South Africa a lot is we look at, is there a possibility of that child being raised within extended family, within the community? That would be first prize for many children, provided they can be safe, they can be taken care of. If those children cannot be taken care of within the family or within the community, then adoption certainly becomes an option. But then again, we need to look at potentially placing children within their own culture first. So certainly, if you look at the South African process, children spend 30 days in the hopes that they can be matched to a same-race family before they can be placed with a transracial family. And it's only if those children can't be placed with a same-race family that transracial adoption becomes an option. And then only if domestic placement isn't an option that we look at inter-country adoption. So that is the principle that we use. But having said that, we know that in South Africa, the number of children who are in need of family care versus the number of people who are able to provide it, the proportions are not good. We only have about just over 1,100 adoptions locally in South Africa and internationally every year. And we have got probably 500,000 children who could benefit from adoption. So I don't think that national adoption would ever completely be able to eradicate the need for inter-country adoption, especially for children who are abandoned, who are older and who are special needs and who can't be placed locally in South Africa.
And you mentioned there are millions of adoptees in South Africa, potential adoptees. There's actually about 4.5 million of these kids in Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, they've outright banned inter-country adoption, saying, hey, you know, we are Ethiopia, we can take care of our own children. Do you think that that is something that they can actually follow through with?
You know, with proper governance and with proper, like, I feel the people in authority should come down to the grassroots, because I feel they're making decisions from the top. They need to come down and see what's going on the ground. And then maybe they'll find solutions as Ethiopia, as Kenya, you know, to kind of rectify everything.
There is certainly this sense of rising nationalism across Africa, which is a great thing. But it needs to probably be moderated to actually, as you said, deal with the situation
on ground,
at hand on the ground, right? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts on that as well. You know, when we talk about locals or domestic adoption, one of the big things that need to happen, of course, is the destigmatization of what the adoption process really is. Because a lot of families might be able to, the local families might be able to adopt, but are worried about what the community will say, you brought a child. So awareness, education, destigmatization, all of those might come in handy to increase.
And also, in fact, in Africa, there's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child.
Correct.
So one of the other options is that they get sent, as you mentioned earlier, to extended families. We are just about out of time. One final question quickly to each one of you. When we talk about inter-country adoptions, we always say the interest of the children is of paramount importance. So with that in mind, is inter-country adoptions good, bad, or a necessary evil? Robin, let's start with you. Quickly, please.
I don't think it's a necessary evil. I think it can actually be potentially a wonderful solution for children, but only in the right circumstances, only if they're children who can't be placed domestically, and only if the process is properly regulated so that we don't have the type of abuses that cause these bans to take place in certain countries.
Well, Martha, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree with Robin. There has to be strict regulations with the international adoption.
Rose, the final word.
I'd say a child must, as of right, be with a family.
Correct.
And if they can't find a family and all other local solutions have been looked for, then if the only option is the international adopter, then let them go to a family that will help them to live a life that, in the way that they should.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. We would like to hear your thoughts on this subject as it continues to draw different reactions on the continent and beyond. Our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as the CGTN Africa website, where you can check this and previous episodes of Talk Africa. And that's all we have time for on this episode. A special thank you to my guests, Robin Wolfson-Forster in Johannesburg. She's a child protection advocate. Wamaitha Mwangi, founder of the Angel Center for Abandoned Children, and Rose Mbanya, a family lawyer, who are both here with me in Nairobi. Do keep the conversation going and tune in again next week for more of Talk Africa. From me, Liu Feifei, goodbye and thank you.